Sean, you were talking about communication. Communication is there's give and there's take and there's feedback. And when you're sitting down with somebody and you can see their expressions and there's a whole lot more to respond to than just the words that are coming out of their mouth.
Hello and welcome to Calvary Conversations, a ministry of Calvary University. Today we're going to have a great conversation on the topic of Christians, communication, and social media. I am Tim Hange, the chair of the English department and the head of the TESOL Studies department at Calvary. My other hosts are
Joshua Paxton, director of the Burnham Center for Global Engagement and associate professor of intercultural studies.
Mike Dodds, director of CU Press and a professor of ministry studies.
And I'm Sean LePage, chairman of the ministry studies department and assistant professor, and the husband of Beth. That's the
Hey, wait.
You gotta throw his family in.
Yes, so all of us have to backtrack and back.
Yeah,
our families are important too.
3 kids, beautiful wife.
On Father's
Day, show
us
up, Sean. All right.
You're welcome.
Well, hey, today our topic is on social media, and this is something that I, as an English teacher, think about a lot. In the world of English, we think a lot about rhetoric, and I know that word may seem negative. It's sometimes used negatively, but in reality, it is just the art of persuading people, and we all do this. And anything that we say typically is laced with rhetoric, with thoughts and motives. Our intent in communication is typically to persuade, to propagate a point. Classic rhetoric, according to the Greeks, which of course we know they were right. Sorry, that's my Greekness coming out. But no, deals with 3 areas: logos, pathos, ethos. Many of you have heard of this. Really, it's just logic, reason, and ethics, right? And these are the things we manage as we speak to people and we communicate. And I, for one, and we've talked about this a bit in our group, but I, for one, am concerned about the direction of communication on social media as a whole. Particularly concerned with how we as believers are using social media as a communication tool. So I have some questions I want to throw out for you guys, and we're going to start with some easier ones, but I'm going to ask some pretty provocative questions. We may not all agree, but that's okay, because this is a conversation, and we will be gracious about it, even when my co-hosts are wrong. I'm joking. Okay, so let's begin. All right, guys, what has been good? All of us, I think, belong in the category of remembering a time when there was no such thing as social media or internet, but let's not go that far back. But what, as we've seen social media develop through the years and social media platforms develop, what has been good or helpful? Let's not be completely unfair to social media here. I don't think any of us are Luddites. We there are some good and helpful social things that have come from social media. What are those things? Chime in, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
I think that's a great place to start, Tim, because we typically do hear how horrible social media is, and it's destroying human civilization as we know it, and all those kinds of criticisms. But actually, it's an incredible tool. It's an incredible tool for communication. And I'm sure that there were similar, concerns and debates about radio and TV and print media and whatever. I mean, I think it's we have to kind of step back and say this. Really, at a fundamental level, we're talking about an incredible communication tool,
right?
That has great potential for good. And since we are people of the book, and we have we are people who desire to share truth and the gospel of Jesus Christ, the more communication tools, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Very good. Gents?
Yeah, I would just throw in there, I mean, social media specifically, the ability to stay in touch with people that you probably lose touch with because they're not a part of your daily experience anymore. And so,
Mhm.
I can definitely speak as somebody who Facebook, Twitter, etc., allows me to retain a connection with folks that they've moved on, they've gone somewhere else in their life, they've moved to some other part of the world. And without that tool, that relationship would have essentially stopped or at least been put on hold until they were in my immediate presence.
Right. Right.
Yeah, people can communicate. Just seeing it in ministry, how it's increased the communication. It used to be way back when you had to call somebody and it'd ring and ring and ring and ring and ring and you hung up. And it ring and ring and ring again. But then you had a means of recording the voice, get a voicemail out there. All right, they at least have my communication, I think. But then you wondered about it. But now, you can actually see, you send off the message and it says the other person received it, whether they want to respond to it right away or not. So
Right.
just the instant communication. Talking to youth pastors that I've had working on the team together, just how it's opened up that immediate communication to people that need somebody to talk to right away. And, kids, teens, you can find that connection where somebody will listen to you. You want to facilitate it.
Yeah.
Good
Yep.
tool.
And I think there's no doubt, like we see this at the individual level and even at the level of group community. Facebook groups are just so amazing. If you have a ministry team at church, throw everybody in a Facebook group, you just blast out to the group. Everybody sees the information, just immediately on their phones. Wow. It really facilitates things. I have become a lot more thoughtful person, or at least I appear to be, as I remember people's birthdays, thanks to the little Facebook pop-ups. This isn't about Facebook exclusively, I know, but wow, that really helps because I'm terrible at remembering birthdays. Like it saved me on my wife's birthday. Actually, no, it didn't. That I remembered, but the others I typically don't. But here though is the next question.
Hey, Tim,
Where
real
is it?
quick,
Yeah.
I think we'd be a little bit remiss too if we didn't point out how important things like social media became over the past 2 years as a result of COVID and not being able to have face-to-face physical relationships with people and everything. I mean, social media just became so much more incredibly important to everybody to be able to retain those connections and relationships, attend church virtually whereas, otherwise we wouldn't have had much of any connection at all.
You brought up the attend church virtually, and that's interesting. And I'm curious whether
Another
that's going to
topic.
come up in the topic of, what has been concerning as well, because that's one thing I'm conflicted about. I've seen some real upsides to that one, but I've also seen some downsides to it in terms of people favoring that mode over personal gathering. And I know I've been tugged in that direction because in my own personal habits, I would find that a lot easier. But anyway, let's move to the broader question of what has been concerning about social media and its use, and where do you see, and particularly with respect to the Christian community, things that just sort of make you cringe a bit and just wonder, is this really good communication? Is this healthy? Is this how we should be using this platform?
I could jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
If I could jump in at the start, because I'm not that much of a social media person, but a rule of thumb that I heard a long time ago relative to other technology was don't be the first adopter. Now, that's just a bit of wisdom. You don't know how much it's going to cost, how much it's going to cost the organization, how much it's going to involve. There are some of us that really like new technology and will jump onto it. So I think that's an element of wisdom until we find out how to use it, what it's best for. I mean, or at least have a better feel than just, oh, wow, this is the latest bells and whistles and way to connect with people. That's a good rule of thumb for parents, to find out what's going on, how it's used, and how it might not be that beneficial. So the downsides of something, even though you might adopt it.
Mike, I think it's really important, even as we, talk about like it's starting to mature, but the platform TikTok is an example of that. And I'm saying this as a person who actually posts daily to TikTok on an educational channel that I have that's not associated with Calvary. But if I had just sort of let my kids put that on their phones when it first came out, I mean, or just jumped into that pool, one might argue cesspool in a lot of cases, indiscriminately watching whatever comes out. I mean, it's a pretty, that's a situation where I think I would have been, as a parent, and even just in terms of my own spiritual life, I think just having your guard up early in the platform, as things were less censored and things were less not censored but less controlled. There's a lot of wisdom to that, especially as a parent. But any other thoughts on what's been concerning, though?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of concerns that come to my mind. First is, this conversation really is about communication. Is social media a good platform for actually communicating well with people? And I think, there's a tendency, I think, for people, because they can be more anonymous, and so they can say things without really looking somebody in the eye, or being in the same room, and so I think there tends to be less sensitivity to someone's feelings, and to someone's, to the human being, that you're communicating with. It's just so easy to just treat people as an avatar on the screen, and really just let them have it. And I think so a lot of communication tends to be really insensitive and dehumanizing, in a sense, more so than when we're sitting in the same room together. And I've had this experience with people who online, blasted me and made fun of my faith and whatever. But then, we got a chance to sit down together, and they were completely different, So I think that's one thing about it. It's just weird how it dehumanizes us and makes us less sensitive to people as people. Another thing that concerns me as a father is just the amount of information and the numerous ideas and opinions and perspectives that my kids can access constantly. My parents were able, to some degree, to filter really bad ideas and harmful ideas and images and things for us. They were able to filter that pretty easily. But it's a lot harder now for parents to filter the bad ideas and the bad stuff on the internet. So with the freedom and the ability to communicate with all kinds of different people in all kinds of different places comes also the ability of bad people with bad ideas and bad ethics and whatever to come at my kids. And so it's a two-edged sword, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah, I have maybe a couple too, and one of those is the speed of it. Just things are posted and they're shared and they're clicked, and it's just before there's any time to actually have a logical reaction to an event or the consequence of an event, it's already traveled around the world 20 times, and people are responding to that even though they don't necessarily have all the facts. And so it creates an environment that is just rife for things to be shared very quickly without the necessary, okay, let's stop and let's analyze what's actually going on here, and so that we can understand it before people who have no idea of the context or the other situation are weighing in on whatever this issue might be.
Right.
The other one, and this comes from teaching intercultural communication, and probably one of the most important principles in intercultural communication is remembering that the meaning, all right, the meaning of the message that I am sharing is being created in the other person's head as they're receiving the message. And so it's not so much what I said that is important as what they heard. And the same holds true for social media, where I may have well and good intentions in saying something or posting something. You know, I might think, okay, this is what I want to say, and I'll type it up and I'll share it, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean the person on the other end of the conversation is receiving it the same way that I intended it to be conveyed.
Right.
Or, I mean, I may even have bad intentions, and depending on, so, you know, like Sean, you were talking about communication. Communication is there's give and there's take and there's feedback. And when you're sitting down with somebody and you can see their expressions, and there's a whole lot more to respond to than just the words that are coming out of their mouth. And while social media, you know, I'll piggyback on Facebook a little bit, gives you the impression of two-way communication. It's really not. It's still a one-way form of communication. And so there's just a lot of give and take, a lot of understanding the other person's perspective that is devoid. And then we can share something without thinking about how this person's going to receive it, and end up being hurtful, disrespectful, whatever. I don't know how many times I've typed something out on Facebook only to delete it because I thought better of it later.
It's interesting. I was reading through this week in preparation for this, an article on nature.com. It's an academic article about a study. It was done during COVID, but it had to do with the increased use of digital media. And I'll read a quote from that. We found that increased use of digital media-based activities and online social e-meetings. Now I realize that's not necessarily social media, but correlated with higher feelings of depersonalization. We also found that participants reporting higher experiences of depersonalization also reported enhanced vividness of negative emotions as opposed to positive. And another quote, the dramatic split between the self, the body, and the world is often reported by those with DP, so depersonalization impact, as having a pane of glass interposed between oneself, body, and the world. So affecting one's sense of realness, i.e. the experience of being present and immersed in the real world here and now. In other words, it's very easy for us in social media to experience this sort of pane of glass between us and the other person. That I think that the other is far more other in the context of social media, and because we feel depersonalized and we depersonalize the other further, it causes communication to take on a very different kind of character than we would necessarily have in person. And maybe the best thing for me to do is to lead right into the next questions, which deal directly with this. I'll just start with the zinger. Should social media be a platform for Christians to communicate political views? Wow. I just went there.
That's heavy.
Tim, I'll jump in. I'll jump into that. I think, you know, it's really, you know, often, you know, there are many moral issues that are identified in our culture as political, and therefore, you know, Christians shouldn't talk about politics. And I think that's a point of confusion for a lot of Christians and for a lot of non-Christians. I think if it's a moral, ethical issue, then Christians should find ways to discuss it, and shouldn't shy away from it because it's couched in the language of politics. But I think the same things apply. Is that, social media, it's easy. It's just easier to just give somebody a zinger and go about your life and not really engage with people in clear, thoughtful, compassionate communication. So I think there are two issues there for me, and one is define politics, and the other is still what's the best way to communicate with somebody. So I also kind of couch that in, would I talk about this if I was sitting across the table from somebody? Would I talk about this subject in the same way, or would I go a different direction? So I think social media can be a platform that Christians should use to communicate political views, because a lot of political views are moral, ethical issues.
Yeah, Sean, as you were talking, the illustration came to my mind. We're talking about communication, a specific mode of communication, social media. But I'm just going to step back on communication. I got my pastor's hat on. Preached a sermon once. I don't know what I said or what context it was, but I made a comment that could have been taken and was taken as if everyone in the room was of a certain political party. Well, after the sermon, one of my gracious elderly deacons walks up to me and says, not everybody in the room is of that political persuasion. He was really trying to box me between the ears, saying, watch out how you, and you said it, Sean, if there's a medium that allows me to shift over quickly to a tone to communication, a level of communication. We talked about the depersonalization of social media. And if I'm involved as a Christian in that, what is the danger with it? The downside of easily slipping into a derogatory, lumping everybody together. Boy, I never wanted to do that in a ministry. And so I apologize to that gentleman, and had to really watch my tongue, because I'm making the assumption everybody's the same. And we sort of do that, I think, is what I hear with social media, and we should not. But speaking to significant issues, it's a platform. We need to take those platforms and graciously. Now it's the tone of a Christian, the character of a Christian, how we communicate.
And in the first hand, I don't think we can not. I don't think we have the option to not be engaged in that kind of discussion in social media type platforms, because that discussion is already being had. And if Christians don't join in that discussion in some way, shape, or form, the discussion is going to go on without our viewpoint, without our perspective. But, just like Sean and Mike have been saying, I think there's an important distinction here in not whether we should, but how do we go about doing it? And so, just basic important principles like so if you're discussing politics, keep the focus on the issue, not a person or a particular group. Address the issue that's being discussed, where obviously don't attack people, and address the issue that's being discussed rather than, calling people names or, calling out a particular group or a particular person. But keep the focus on the issue itself. So there's a way, right? There's a way to do it correctly, and there's a way to do it incorrectly. But in some way, shape, or form, we have to be engaged, because otherwise the conversation will move forward without our input.
But this is where I would like to push back a bit, guys. I'm just going to be just bluntly say some of the things that concern me. One is I find Christians often engaging on social media, blasting their political opinions with zero sensitivity to who the audience is. And I don't think in that case you are actually following the Matthew 7:12 principle.
Right.
So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. I would have to ask you, if you were the non-believer, how would you, well, how would an, how, I mean, ultimately, how would you want to be treated as a non-believer? Would you want a Christian first blasting their political views at you, drawing lines, and knowing that you stand on the other side of them, saying provocative things to really get your ire up about issues that are important to you, but you don't see from a biblical perspective? Or would you rather have a different kind of conversation, one that perhaps considers your viewpoint? I just don't think that. I think a lot of times Christians on social media blast their opinions without any real thought to what kind of impact does this have. The desire seems to be more motivated by, my ire is up, I gotta say something. Okay, one. Two, I gotta identify. I'm just letting everybody know I still identify with this particular camp. And three, very often, well, that's not really three. There's another issue here at play too that deeply concerns me. And that is, I'm going to invoke a bit of Tim Keller here. He talks a lot about disordered loves and how there are things in life that we can love, but if they're disordered and God is placed below that love, you can love your family, but if you love your family more than God, they will be your source of what your family, how your family turns out will determine how you feel about yourself. I mean, there are all sorts of, you'll become unhealthily dependent upon them to meet your emotional, all sorts of things happen. Bad things happen when you disorder something as good as a love for family. And I'm really deeply concerned, and maybe this is a topic for another one, but that in Christendom today, there is a disordered love for politics, and we are looking for political solutions and bluntly following the God man who seemed to really stay out of a lot of political issues that are far worse than the stuff we're dealing with now in his time. Yeah, I mean, do you think social justice would have been a thing to talk about back then? At a time when Romans were forcing Jews to carry their loads for miles, et cetera, right? Jesus didn't organize a peaceful resistance. He said, if somebody forces you to walk 1 mile, walk with them too. I don't see Jesus pursuing politics as the solution. And I think it's demonstrative of a disordered love when Christians rely so much on what's going to happen in America, and to Christianity utterly depends on the next election. Really? Really, as if God isn't in control, as if the church hasn't grown through times of oppression historically? Does it really depend on all that? So I'm throwing that out as another perspective, and maybe I've just touched on a larger conversation, but I don't know. I'd love to hear some pushback from you guys on that. I just don't see most of the political talk by Christians on social media as healthy or effective. I just don't think it changes anybody's mind.
Yeah. So first of all, I think you're still talking about the way in which we communicate, not necessarily what we communicate. And I think, I still say, let's get down and in the nuts and bolts of this, and let's define politics, because I just believe that almost everything that's labeled as politics is a moral ethical issue. Even the use of funding and all kinds of things like that. I mean, those are all moral ethical issues. Now, whether Christians should debate those things with particular people, and that's all different. That's really more about the approach, and the method, the way that we communicate.
Again, I think so. On sticking to the topic of social media, I think it's again, those conversations can be had, but how do you go about that? Do you do it with a a peaceful, respectful attitude towards those who differ from you? Or are you doing it in a very attacking and vindictive manner? And therein lies a part of the difficulty with conversations in a format like that, where somebody posts something and you're responding to their post, and maybe you're responding to their post 2 hours later, and they're not going to see that response until 4 hours from now, and you've written them, a 5-page paper on your response to their 2 sentences or something. And so that's social media is definitely a very imperfect form of conversation in order to have the accurate feedback for that. When it's a case like that, somebody, honestly, you should say, you know what, let's set up a time to go grab some coffee and talk about it in person, rather than continuing this discussion in a social media platform, right? Take that step. And that's probably an important concept too, which is social media, and we've touched on it here and there, which is social media is so often devoid of the relationship. If I have the deeper relationship that I have with somebody who disagrees with me, the more I'm going to give that person my time and my effort, my energy to understand their perspective and why they might not agree with me. And then at the end of the day, whether I agree with that person, whether we agree or not, we can still maintain that relationship, right?
Right.
But social media becomes a platform for, here's my position, and I don't care what relationship I may or may not have with people who disagree with me. And that's where it becomes bad, because whether it's political issues or it's moral issues like Sean's talking about, or faith issues even, if there's no relational involvement, then there's no real context for accurate communication and understanding of why the person holds this particular belief. And then also communicating, just communicating that all important concept of, you and I may disagree on this, but I still love you. I still respect you as a person. You're still my friend. I get a call from the hospital, I'm still going to be there.
I would argue that love is
kind
the
of thing.
motivating factor of what was said in the first place. And so tone is really important in how we communicate it. Considering the audience, Sean, I really liked what you said. Would I say this if I were across the table from that person? Here's the problem on social media. We make these public posts that include our unsaved coworkers, the people we go to church with, mature believers, immature believers, people of all different ages. And we haven't done the basic rule of writing, which is consider your audience. Right? And I don't think you can love a person if you haven't sat down and really thought. And that's why I have some friends who I think the way they've handled this is really good. They've invited people to certain groups to discuss certain topics. And I really like that. And they're open to inviting others, but there's just an understanding that in this group, as believers, we're discussing this topic. Or if you're interested in having this kind of political discussion, here's the group, here are the ground rules of respect, et cetera, right? And that, I think you get better results with that than you do with sort of this broad blast to everyone without considering its impact on each person. And by the way, I'll say this too, Facebook does not care about any of this. No social media platform does. In fact, conflict drives more interaction, and what they want is people on the platform interacting. So that's really important to understand. Not a believer, but a great thinker, Seth Godin, says that you have to understand on social media, you are not the customer, you are the product, right? You are the product that's being sold to advertisers, right? For them to get other customers, sucked into, into their system as well. So, you have to approach that in a way to not let yourself be manipulated and treated like a product by just conforming to what social media and everybody else wants you to do, start conflict.
That's a really good principle, Tim. And it brings to mind I don't remember exactly what it is, and this has happened numerous times, but so something controversial will happen. Okay, so like somebody has a wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl, et cetera. All right, and now everybody's talking about this, but in the process of talking about it, you're sharing it, which is propagating it to a broader audience than it might have had you not shared it, had you not taken that step and shared it and sent it out. So that's, again, that's another, maybe it's a think before you post kind of thing, just in terms of sit back and, do I need to share this video in order to talk about it? Like, could you address it without actually passing on the negative thing that just occurred?
Yeah.
I think that's actually a really good pausing point, not stopping point, because we're going to come back with a round 2 of this discussion. But let's go ahead and pause at this point, and when we come back on the next session, we're going to talk a little bit more about. We addressed should social media be a platform for Christians to communicate political views. Let's talk about faith views, and then let's talk more specifically about how the Bible informs good communication on social media or otherwise. I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation with you guys, and I look forward to it. Thank you, guys, audience, for watching and listening to Calvary Communications. It's a ministry of Calvary University. We hope it sparks some discussions among you and your friends. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, concerns, ideas for content as well. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary Conversation.